So whilst that was probably dubious from a perspective, I was happy to take Ruth as a chair of the Devonport Takapuna. So welcome, Ruth. Are you online? Have we got the local board online?
Yes, Ruth, Chair Jackson is just coming online now. Chair Simpson.
So sorry for the delay. I was having connectivity issues, which has blighted all of us from time to time. So are you ready for me to present?
We are. Thank you.
Lovely.
Jackson. Yes, Ruth.
Lovely. So I might do the next slide thing, please, if I may. I'm not really sure how to drive these online yet. I need a technical lesson. So if we go back to the yes, this one. This is great. Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm a little bit rattled by not being able to get in. So I note that there were 20 submissions to this, and first of all, I want to note that while that seems like a very low number, I compare that with the number of submissions to things that have been widely advertised across the whole of Auckland for public submissions. Signs bylaw, there were 106 submissions. Stormwater bylaw, 79 submissions. Property maintenance and nuisance, 30 submissions. That's from across the whole of Auckland. So in that context, 20 from our area about a local park being proposed for sale doesn't seem too bad. I'll just very quickly rattle through some of the high points which are in fact in your agenda with the submissions. People spoke about green space being essential for wellbeing. Parks and open spaces needed to. Sorry, I need to go back a step. Madam Chair, thank you very much for allowing us me the opportunity to speak with you today, and thank you also, councillors, for your time and attention. I'm sorry, I have completely forgotten my manners. Going back to the public submissions, people are concerned about the loss of any green space, particularly as we face unprecedented intensification. Park is already well used by local workforce. It's becoming increasingly well used by local residents, particularly through these COVID times as our green spaces have become more appreciated. They spoke about environmental and biodiversity benefits, the climate emergency, and whether this is, this being contrary to Council's climate goals, noting that once it's sold, it is gone forever. That the money isn't being reinvested in the area, and that the sale was opposed by the local board and by residents. If I could please have the next slide, thank you. So the sale of a local park would normally be a local board decision, and that would normally be, okay, we're going to sell one piece of land in order to reinvest in something else in our area. That clearly isn't the case with the things on the emergency budget asset sales list. We passed a resolution opposing the sale of parks, reserves, land or other spaces that fulfil a service requirement or are needed to respond to future growth demand. In our view, this does fulfil a service requirement, and it is needed to cater for our population growth. If I could please have the next slide. Our open space network plan that we refreshed last year, staff identified that there is in fact significant gaps in our open spaces in our area. Really the only one is the old Devonport Borough. Pretty much everything else in the black circles on the left hand, figure 11, you can see there are shortages, and figure 10 on the right hand side, you see where our the red outlines show where our most intensive growth is expected. This is going to be even more so now under NPSUD and the Housing Supply Act, and they correspond very much to exactly where our shortage already is, let alone coping with growth. May I please have the next slide? This is from your agenda. I've just made a few little colourful additions to it. So the green parks shown here I've done orange cross-hatching, sorry, not terribly well drawn, against parks that are steeply sloping and are therefore not suitable for all ages and stages. They're certainly not really mobility friendly or friendly for our older people. They're not places where you can run around and kick a ball if you're a kid. The ones with the sort of magenta hatching, they are taken up by sports and clubs leases. So they're not places where you can go and just chill out or have a sandwich at lunchtime or, again, you know, just randomly kick a ball about. And the one with the blue X sort of underneath the very large pink one, that's actually a stormwater pond. It's a fenced off stormwater pond that nobody can access. So some of these places are not quite all that they seem. If I could please have the next slide. And this next slide actually adds a layer of turquoise cross-hatching in the other direction. Those are parks that have been identified at risk of coastal inundation and erosion. So as far as future needs, we don't know how useful they will really be in our open space portfolio that is yet to come. If I might please have the next slide. We also noticed that on the title, which I don't think is in your report, is that there are a number of encumbrances on the title. There's a building restriction line, a sewer easement, and electricity supply easements. If I could move to the next slide, please. So the building line restriction, which I have looked up, was Order in Council from 1929. That means the front part of the site can't be built on, and I've circled that in a sort of a bluey purple there, so you can see that building line restriction there. So that trumps everything, including the unitary plan and NPSUD, and you can't build on that bit. If I could go to the next one, please. There's also a sewer easement that's been in place since 1957. That bisects, that goes across the back. I've circled the property in question again in a purpley blue, and you'll see the red sewer line coming about a third of the way from the back boundary. So that is also an impediment to this being an easy site for anybody who wanted to develop it. If I could have the next slide, please. The current Auckland Council geomaps, the underground services layer, shows there is in fact also another sewer that almost bisects it north-south in half. So again, that's, you know, that could be an impediment to this being a useful site. If I could have the next slide, please. Less problematic, but up the eastern boundary, you'll see there's stormwater. And I believe that the one to the west or on the left as we're looking at it here is beyond the area being sold to those, so that's not an issue. If I could please have the next slide. These are the electricity easements. There's one at the front that I've circled labelled F and one at the back labelled G, which again I've circled. So there's quite a lot going on this site. If I could please have the next slide. So these were really sort of things that I wondered and wasn't clear about whether the committee had been made aware of these different, of the building line, the sewer easements, the electricity supply easements, you know, or received any advice on the likely effect of those on what the potential building footprint might be and the development potential. It's only a 496 square metre site, and whether or not you've received any advice on the potential of effect of that on what you might yield from a sale, and whether or not that is really going to be helpful in fixing the city's financial woes and weighing that up against the social and environmental and climate cost of the loss of green space. And that is it from me. I'd like to, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have, Madam Chair. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair Jackson. I'll open now to the committee for any questions. There being none.
Yeah, sorry, Madam Chair. I was trying to type up in the chat bar.
That's okay.
Bit slow. My School C typing skills are down a bit, so I'll just interrupt. I've got a couple of questions for Chair Jackson, if that's okay. Thank you for your presentation, Ruth. Two questions really. The first goes to the local board's position. I take your point that in the public consultation there was 100% opposition to the sale from submitters. Could you also confirm that this has been a consistent position of the local board since 2017? Am I correct in assuming that?
Yes.
Okay. Just the follow-up to that, and it really goes to those initial questions, is that in Takapuna is an area obviously earmarked for intensive development. Is it your understanding that, you know, essentially in those such areas is that what there is what we've got? So in terms of acquisition of new space, that doesn't actually occur in you know, in brownfield areas. That all that does happen is perhaps money's invested in existing space. So in instances like that, this opportunity to hold on to land or acquire land is really not a feasible expectation of the community, even when intensification occurs on a fairly significant level. Is that your understanding of how the, you know, the acquisition of open space goes in
yes,
metropolitan centres?
Sorry, thank you for the question. Yes, it's a discussion that we had fairly extensively as we were doing a refresh of our open space network plan that we adopted last year, is that there's really nowhere in fairly well built up areas like ours that's available to be purchased. There are no sizable, a lot of the parks that we have across that area, and I'm sure this is the same in many areas, where you previously had large blocks of undeveloped land and a developer took it on, and then they had to provide a park or open space as a part of that, or a reserve contribution. But we don't have big blocks left to carve up. You know, the chances of us having, you know, if a house came on the market and we thought, oh, that's in a nice place where we've got a gap, let's buy that, there's no money to do that. We don't get growth funding. The growth funding for the acquisition of new parks, we've told none of that's coming to us, and that will all be to develop parks and open spaces in the more, you know, greenfield and city fringe areas that are being developed into housing. So A, there's no land to buy, and B, if there was, we would have no hope of affording it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Walker.
Sure. So I've got two or three questions. One of them picks up on the commentary in the report around the climate impact statement, and I know you refer to that. If we have a situation where Takapuna Beach, which is arguably a very important place where people congregate and they walk and the like, effectively becomes a beach where there is no beach anymore, because even an incredibly small increase in sea level rise basically means you'll have high tide all the time. And as you point out, there hasn't been the coastal compartment planning done for Takapuna, and there could be impacts around erosion and the like. Do you think it's premature, it's really too early to make this sort of decision, and that this notion that there aren't any climate impact effects is actually not accurate?
Yes, again, thank you for the question, Councillor Walker. There doesn't seem to be, now we have seen some in different workshop sessions, council officers have demonstrated different sort of map layers to us that show coastal erosion, coastal inundation, that sort of thing. So while this particular park isn't directly affected, it is indirectly affected, because if we lose, as you say, usable beach, as that comes up to the actual boundaries of people's properties and stays there. And there, you know, we've seen maps where, you know, homes along the beachfront all along our entire coast could be lost, or parts of their properties lost to eventual inundation and sea level rise. The projected lines we've seen of coastal erosion are even more scary than the coastal inundation ones. And again, that might take away, you know, usable, you know, the park down at the end of the promenade where the boat ramp is. That's absolutely in the zone for both. We could lose that. We could lose, you know, really usable beach. A lot of the Takapuna Beach Reserve could go. That's, yeah. So it becomes then those spaces that are not taken by that become more important. The whole of Barry's Point Reserve and the whole of Patawani Walkway and Reserve, those are in the inundation zone as well. So the ones that we have that are high enough above sea level not to be affected become more important.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. The other question I've got goes to this point that's being made in point 12 in the officer's report around this open space provision around a 1,000 square metre minimum requirement for pocket parks. And now, my question goes like this. Obviously, that might be a consideration for new purchases, but in a situation where you've got a relatively small park, but it's incredibly well placed, if we accepted the advice of Jan Gaal around the importance of having human scale and trees and the like and intimacy, and the circumstance where we see in many cities overseas, London, Vienna, all over the place, where you actually have these small parks in cities that are incredibly well used. Do you think that this policy, while it might have some merit for acquisitions, really doesn't apply in a situation like this? And I guess further to that, I mean, if we lost this park space, the cost of actually replacing it in terms of anything in the area, because of the huge and escalating value, especially because of the government's intensification, and obviously the development that would be required, because this little park is up and running. I mean, it's got the seats, it's got the lovely trees, it's, you know, it's got everything, would be almost impossible. So my question really is around some of these comments that appear in the report around this 1,000 square metres.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, and I do agree. It's not something I've specifically spoken with other board members about, but yeah, I mean, 1,000 square metres is great as a measure when you're looking at acquiring a new park, but and I think that's an ideal to reach for. But I don't. That means that we should go around anything that we've got that's less than 1,000 square metres and start saying that doesn't make the grade, let's get rid of it. I think that would certainly be counterproductive. And in acquiring new space, again, it is a very worthy ideal, and it gives you space to plant trees and do different activities and have different things for different people. But, you know, there are not that many suburban properties these days that are 1,000 square metres. And so even if something came up for sale that we're thinking it's in an area, we somehow managed to magic up the money for somewhere, but it's only 500 square metres or 600 or 700, doesn't meet the 1,000, therefore let's pass on that. That doesn't make sense either. You know, and while it's a worthy goal, we shouldn't get rid of things that are less than that than we've got. We can't afford to do that. There's too great a climate and social cost to do that, and the financial and monetary cost of buying anything is prohibitive, and we shouldn't not buy smaller parcels that are available simply because we've got the ideal of 1,000 square metres. We need little bits everywhere. We need every square inch that we can keep our hands on.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
So just a supplementary question, Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry.
I'd be interested to know how many very small pocket parks across Auckland, particularly in older parts of the city, would be affected if we applied this policy. It could have severe ramifications.
We can follow up on that query for you, Councillor. Is that it, Councillor?
Yes, small is beautiful.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ruth, thank you very much. I think it's very helpful, your presentation. We, as an organisation, we need to be diligent that we understand the titles, I guess, in terms of encumbrances and easements, etc. So thank you for that. Probably, Madam Chair, the signal there might be we need to ensure that's always in our reports if they exist. But Ruth, my question goes around, I guess, a concern about false economies. You've talked about costs, social costs, environmental costs, but if we just look at the financial costs here, and I think Councillor Walker was starting to allude to it, and I thought he might ask my question directly, but in terms of the actual price that we might fetch for the sale versus the replacement cost of replacing that land if you had the opportunity to buy it, theoretically, have you got any numbers around that? I'm just concerned, we might be discounting sales, not only on this property, but perhaps for others that we need to look at going forward, Ruth. Have you got any quantitative numbers you could give us in regard to that?
No, we certainly haven't ever had any regarding this property and what the potential yield of that would be in the market. I'm aware that new valuations are out, which may or may not affect that. They're usually behind the market anyway, those. They're usually sometime in catching up. And again, we haven't gone down into really fine-grained detail about what it would cost us to buy something elsewhere, simply because there's nothing available. So it's very much a hypothetical until you've actually got a piece of land. But the overwhelming consensus is that we simply would not be able to buy anywhere. We simply don't have anything in our capital budget to buy anything. It would be different if we were, as a local board, making a decision that this isn't serving a great purpose. It might be in the wrong lane. Whatever reason why local boards might sometimes decide to sell a parcel of park or open space. But normally they're doing that because they're reinvesting. They're reinvesting in the community centre, or they're buying a more suitable space somewhere else. And that isn't happening here. That money is being lost from the area, although I know that the thing is sort of topping up our appalling bank balance is not a, I understand that, but it means that we are not providing any kind of like for like or even similar to our residents. So our residents are losing an amenity, and we have also been championing our board, looking at, from a financial point of view, is looking at selling a parcel of the city's airport shares so that selling open spaces becomes unnecessary. And that the only time we would sell an open space is where we can put that to better use for our community in a really direct, on the ground, they can touch it, feel it, see it kind of way.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, it does. With obviously that we're trying to create money as a revenue stream, but Madam Chair, I just wonder if there could be a lesson in here for us around the financial analysis that we get as councillors. The even if it's in confidential, the yields that the disposal might be producing versus any potential discount that there needs to be on the property because of what might be sitting on the title, Madam Chair. I think that'd be helpful for us to know as decision makers.
Thank you.
And I think Ruth has probably highlighted that today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor. It was a tough one for the chair, definitely. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore, I think you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation, Ruth. Very simple question. How much has the local board invested in this park over the past 10 years? Other than general.
It hasn't been. It hasn't required a great deal of investment. It was landscaped and trees planted. Really the money that it costs us basically amounts to sort of mowing and emptying the bins and, making sure the seat's maintained. It's not a drain on our finances, but so it's very cost effective in providing a very good amenity for very little output, and it hasn't required a lot of, it hasn't required capital investment. It's a lovely little spot.
And do you have usage numbers?
No, but I doubt that local boards anywhere have usage numbers on really any of their parks. I don't think we have the facility to collect that data. So it's purely anecdotal. I see people out there all the time having their lunch. It's become more popular with, local residents as we're out and about, over these last years of COVID. And people are rediscovering spaces that they hadn't, they don't want to go to a park that's really crowded. So they're filtering back out into the parks that, have been slightly less loved. This one's got a really great benefit in that it's sheltered. So whereas the beachfront reserve, you get the easterly roaring in and it's not a place you want to be sitting and eating your sandwich, whereas this one's sheltered by, housing and things from further down the street. And even when it's roaring a gale down at the beach, you can still get a nice sheltered spot there to have your lunch. And, so residents are rediscovering a lot of our spaces and making more use of them. But it's anecdotal. I don't think anyone anywhere has counts on any park. I could be wrong about that.
Thanks, Ruth. Are the ashtrays, cigarette sort of holding things still there? I mean, I remember them from years ago when I went there.
No, there's just a burn. I think ashtrays are very much not de rigueur anymore.
Cool, thank you.
People do use it to smoke, but we're not actively encouraging them.
I seem to remember it's called Smokers Park way back in the day, but that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Funnily enough, I did see the ashtrays when I visited. Deputy Chair of the Finance Committee, Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. 3 questions, but I'll be quick. First and foremost, is there a shortage of public open space in Takapuna?
Yes.
Okay.
Staff identified that and enshrined that and elucidated in our open space network plan and highlighted Takapuna as one of the many areas in our... So 3/4 of our area has a shortage, including Takapuna.
Okay, and just picking up on your point around this that you've presented around spaces to kick a ball in, it doesn't seem very large and it's next to a service lane. Is this site appropriate to kick a ball around in?
It's one of the only flat ones we've got. We've got that and we've got Potters Park. That's pretty much it, where you could kick a ball anywhere. So I guess, it would be nice to say buy the place next door to this and make it even bigger. That probably isn't going to happen. So, this is one of only 2 flat spaces we've got in Takapuna. So it may be small, but it's
not including the beach.
Not
including the beach, I take it. Yeah, not including the beach, I take it.
No, and I mean at high tide, the beach isn't a place that you can kick a ball. Anyway.
Sure. Okay, just one last question. What was the board's resolution on asset recycling in the emergency budget?
So I have the wording here. I have the one specifically relating to parks and open spaces. Does not support the divestment or sale of park or reserve land or other open space that currently fulfills a service requirement or any other land that has been identified as needed to respond to future growth and demand. So our view is that this does fulfil a service requirement and it is needed to respond to future growth and demand.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Point of order.
Sorry, I've got a point of order, so I'll have to stop. Councillor Hills, your point of order.
Question for clarification. Was the chair reading out the amendment that lost as opposed to the actual resolution that passed? Just want to check.
This is the one that passed.
The one that I see that passed
says supports the concept of asset recycling and the sale of council assets holding the means of increasing revenue, but only if those assets proposed for recycling or divestment have been identified as not serving a current or future service requirement. It seems you read the one that lost, which
And
was
what,
does not support.
Just a point of order, look, Ruth, you don't need to check. The resolution is actually in our report under local board feedback, item 28. So I will, I'll leave that where it is. But thank you, Councillor Henderson, for asking the question. I'll leave the point of order. The fact is in the paper. Thank you. Is that all, Councillor Henderson?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Yes. Next question, Chair of the IMSB, David Typering. Kia ora.
Ngā mihi, kia koutou tēnei wā. Kia ora, Ruth. Just a question. Ngāti Whātua, or Tururanga or Ngāti Whātua has shown an interest in the property for disposal. What engagement has the local board had with Ngāti Whātua?
The elected members, we have not had that opportunity at all. But we understood that from the report on your agenda that, you know, council officers had undertaken some kind of engagement, but we weren't invited to be part of that as a board.
Would the board would have liked to have talked to Tururanga or Ngāti Whātua?
Yeah.
But you didn't choose to do that of your own action?
It was a situation where it was really being dealt with largely through council, and we were invited to give feedback. So we weren't really part of the process of any of that. And that seems to be a fairly sort of common thing, is that those are dealt with at sort of staff level, and we are not certainly encouraged to do that, which is something that we've talked to staff about actually on other issues as well.
Okay, that's unfortunate. Because they have a position, I understand, that if it goes to disposal, that they want an option to secure that property. What would be the board's view about that, or yours?
I'd have to ask the board. That's not something that we'd been aware of, and so we haven't formed a view on that. I wouldn't like to sort of second guess the other members' views on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Look, I've got no further questions, so I'll just ask a final question, Ruth, before we wrap up. Does your board support the council's smoke-free policy?
I don't think it's something that we've resolved on, but again, I wouldn't like to guess, but I do.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's not something that's actually come before us.
Okay, thank you. Look, I've got no further questions, so I'd like to really thank you, Ruth, for coming to present today. I really appreciate you taking the time, and to that end, I have been asked by your two councillors for them to move your vote of thanks, and I think that's appropriate. So if I could possibly ask Councillor Hills and Councillor Darby to move your vote of thanks. Is that all right, councillors?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Jackson. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I've got a vote of thanks. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Aye. Carried. Thank you.